one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. I will not be shaken.
In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son."
As we finish off the last of our Christmas biscuits and start to pack away our Christmas decorations, it can feel like Christmas is well and truly done with. But of course, the 25th of December marks the birth of Jesus, and there is a lot more going on in that story, which we have explored a little bit in our Christingle and Nativity services. We have the arrival of the shepherds, we have the wise men and their gifts, we have Herod and his murderous rage, we have the escape to Egypt. It really is a dramatic story of which we are going to explore a little bit more of today. In fact, today in the church calendar, which the Hub kind of plays a little bit fast and loose with, is a day called Epiphany. Epiphany means a moment of sudden and great revelation or realization. And it's the day traditionally in the church when we remember the Magi, that is the wise men visiting Jesus. And this is celebrated in some churches on the 6th of January and in some churches on the 1st Sunday of January. So that's Epiphany, and that is today. And it's really important as well, because it's not just the visit of the wise men bringing some fancy gifts. We also need to remember that the wise men would have been Gentiles, and so it's also considered to be the kind of revelation of the Messiah to the Gentiles. But before I get into that, I wanted to chat to you guys about New Year's resolutions. I don't know if you guys have any this year. If you do, why don't you pop them in the comments? That would be a lot of fun to see each other's resolutions. I was thinking about my resolutions for the coming year, and I managed to find last year's one on the Notes app in my phone, and I think I had managed to do 2 of them, and there were about 6. In my defence though, 4 of them were cut off by the pandemic, as I had one to go and see some bands and one to see lots of films at the cinema, which obviously if I didn't manage to do by the end of March, I wasn't doing this year. But I did manage to read the number of books I wanted to read, and I did manage to go to another country at one point, which was fun. And so I was kind of reflecting on what my resolutions should be this year. And I was kind of thinking, you know, well, I don't know when restrictions will lift. Like, when will we be back to normal? Will we be back to normal, etc., etc. And so I was thinking about the nature of resolutions and what they are and what they can be this year. And what I was kind of reflecting on and what I kind of landed on was that my past resolutions had been an attempt to tell a different story about myself. So we all have kind of stories or labels in our heads about ourselves. We're good at this, we're bad at that, we're this type of person, we're introvert, we're extrovert, we're, you know, all that stuff. And I looked back at my resolutions, I thought, this is me trying to tell a different story about myself. So one year my resolution was to learn a language, and another year it was to learn an instrument. And I thought, I'm trying to tell a story about myself where I'm the kind of person that speaks many languages, or I'm the kind of person that can play an instrument. And I thought it was a great way of looking at resolutions and trying to adapt them for this year. What story am I currently telling about myself, and how do I want to change that story? I'm not saying I'll achieve it more if I reflect on it, but it's always worth a go. And I really liked the way of looking at resolutions as stories, because I think we as human beings love stories. We like to see faces in clouds, we like to see narratives, we like to see stories and read them and watch them, and I think that's one of the reasons that God has chosen to communicate with us through stories a lot of the time. A lot of the Bible is written as a story, as narrative. My favourite parts of the Bible are the narrative sections. I must confess, I have been known to skip over lists of genealogies, he begat, all that stuff, and instructions for building the tabernacle and stuff like that. That is my confession today, that I have often skipped over those parts to get to the stories. I love stories, and I think God does as well, and that's why he has chosen to communicate with us through stories. And as I mentioned, we have a lot more of the nativity story after December 25th, and it is one of the best stories in the Bible, I think. And God is an excellent storyteller, and so is Matthew, who wrote the gospel that we're looking at today. And storytelling is something that I've been thinking about a bit more this past year as well. So this last year, basically as a form of really elaborate procrastination from writing essays, I signed up for a creative writing course. And so I went to that. It was about 10 weeks long. It was really interesting. I met some really interesting people and read some of their stories as well. And they were all really amazing. And I loved it. But anyway, one of the things that we looked at was something called foreshadowing and callbacks. And this kind of really hit a nerve with me, because I could see a lot of my favourite movies and my favourite books kind of employed this device a lot. So if you don't know, foreshadowing is when you get in a story a hint of what's to come. It's something that you often won't notice on your first viewing of a film or your first reading of a book, but it foreshadows and it hints at something that is coming up. And then a callback is kind of the reverse, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. A callback is when you get to a part of the story and it references an earlier part of the story. You'll often find this in kind of comedies and stuff like that. You'll get a repeated punchline, or you'll get a reference to an earlier gag. Stand-up is really well known for doing this as well. One of my favourite comedic examples of callbacks and foreshadowing is in a film called Shaun of the Dead, which I really love, which is great to watch if you're over 15, I think. And they have repeated lines, repeated scenes, and they've done it really well, and it's really funny. And it also happens often in dramatic films as well. Say, for example, if you were watching a Star Wars film and your main hero found Luke Skywalker's lightsaber, that would be both a callback and foreshadowing. So it is calling back to previous films when Luke was the hero. It's reminding you of how you might have felt during those films. It's reminding you of that character and what he was like and what it means for that lightsaber to be there. And then it's also a foreshadowing of what your main hero may become later in the narrative, or if Luke may make an appearance again. So it's a callback and it's foreshadowing. And I thought that was a really good example of that as well in Star Wars. And God is an excellent storyteller, and we have foreshadowing and callbacks throughout the Bible. In the passage that we're looking at today from Matthew 2, with the visit of the Magi and the escape to Egypt, we have a lot of foreshadowing and callbacks. First up, with the Magi, we have kind of foreshadowing of who Jesus is going to be. So they have followed a star. They're probably astronomers or astrologers, which is much the same thing back then. And they have seen a star in the sky, possibly the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, but that's a kind of side note. You can Google that. It's very interesting. Basically, Saturn and Jupiter get very close together, and then they are brighter in the sky. Probably someone who's better at space stuff can explain that better than me. But that's possibly what they saw in the sky that told them that a new king was being born to the Jews. So we have this foreshadowing of the fact that Jesus is a king, that he's going to be king. But also, as I said before, Epiphany and the visit of the Magi is often thought of as a revelation of Jesus to the Gentiles. So we also, in this story, have this foreshadowing that yes, Jesus is going to be king, he's going to be Messiah, whatever word you want to use, but also his Messiahship is going to be relevant for the Gentiles. He's going to be a Messiah for all the people, not just the Jewish people. So that's our first piece of foreshadowing. And it also foreshadows the end of Matthew's gospel, when the disciples are instructed by Jesus to go out and make disciples of all nations. And next up, we have the Holy Family's escape to Egypt and then subsequent return from Egypt, which hopefully is really obviously a callback to Exodus from the Old Testament. I spoke a little earlier about stories that define us and telling new stories about ourselves as resolutions. And the Exodus narrative is really the story that defines the Jewish people, both then and now. It's the most important story in the Old Testament probably for them, and it's one that gets kind of woven through the rest of the Old Testament as well. And so when God sends an angel to warn Joseph about Herod's plans and sends them to Egypt, I think this is God reminding us of the Exodus story. He's calling us back to that story, and that includes kind of, as I mentioned before, reminding the audience, reminding us, reminding the first hearers and readers of how the story of the Exodus defines them, how it makes them feel. So it kind of gives you an emotional connection from that story to this story. And this Exodus theme runs throughout the Gospels, from Jesus' birth and flight to Egypt through to his final meal, which is a Passover dinner. So in this short passage on Jesus' birth with the Magi and then the flight to Egypt, we have a foreshadowing and we have callbacks. And basically what I think this is trying to tell us is that Jesus is going to be a new Exodus. That Jesus is going to be a new Exodus, but this time it's going to include the Gentiles. So what does Exodus mean, both the word and the story? Exodus comes to us from the Greek. It's made up of two Greek words, ex, which means out, and hodos, which means path, way, or road. So it means a way out, it means departure, a path out. As a side note, one of my favourite films has a little bit of an Easter egg on this, which I love. I've watched a lot of films in lockdown, which is why my talk has mentioned films multiple times. And anyway, one of my favourite films is The Shawshank Redemption. And one of my favourite little Easter eggs in there is that after they have discovered that Andy, the main protagonist, has escaped. Oh, sorry, that's a massive spoiler. But anyway, after they found out that Andy has escaped, they find the hiding place for his rock hammer was inside his Bible, and he has hidden it at the beginning of Exodus. He's cut out the shape of the rock hammer in the Bible, and I just thought that was such a cool little Easter egg, because obviously the rock hammer was Andy's way out. And anyway, that's completely irrelevant to everything, but I just thought it was a super cool little Easter egg that I noticed recently. So anyway, so what does it mean for us today in terms of Jesus? Well, I think like the Exodus, it means that Jesus's saving work was accomplished by God himself through a man. In the Exodus, that was Moses, and of course, today that is Jesus. It means that Jesus's saving work saves us from slavery and death. In the Exodus, that was actual slavery and death, and today that is the slavery of brokenness and selfishness, and it saves us from that, and it saves us ultimately from death as well. It means that Jesus' saving work creates a lasting relationship between us and God, with both privilege and responsibility on both sides. In terms of the Exodus, it was the beginning of a formal covenant between the Israelites and God, and a lasting relationship between God and God's people. And for us today, that means that we also have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and we are both privileged and have responsibilities on that as well. And so I think that Jesus is the new Exodus, and that's what this passage is kind of hinting at with its callbacks and its foreshadowing. And so this year, as I was thinking about what I wanted my resolutions to be, I was thinking about the stories that define me and the stories I want to tell about myself. And one of the stories that defines me is, of course, the story of Jesus from birth to death. As a Christian, I believe that this event brings me into a loving relationship with God. And so as I look to what I want to achieve or the kind of person I want to be in 2021, I look to Jesus and I look to his story. How do I want my story to look in light of his? And so I would encourage you to also be guided by Jesus' story when you're considering your resolutions for this year. Whether you want to maybe read the Bible every day, maybe read the whole Bible in a year, maybe you want to have a resolution to pray every day and spend time with God. Whatever you want that to be, I encourage you to look to Jesus' story to inform your story.